Hey, I'm Jackie. This is 50 Years, 3 films, and 1 love story. So basically, we're going to be discussing 3 different films. We're going to be discussing Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, released in 1967, Guess Who, released in 2005, and You People, released in 2023. So all 3 of these films follow basically the same kind of story, and they try to make essentially the same point. So all 3 are basically introducing us to an interracial couple who have been dating for a while, or maybe in the case of the first film, they kind of just met, but they're meeting each other's parents and they're essentially trying to get their marriage figured out and have their marriage blessed by their parents. So things get uncomfortable in all 3 of the films between not only the couple but their families, and then when their families meet, there is some tension. And I think a lot of that has to do with simply the fact that we are in the United States. We are in a nation where we had slavery for much of our history, we had segregation for much of our history, and just now, kind of within really the last 50 years, are we sort of getting to a point where we're trying to progress past those things. And so I think all of these films are very modern in nature, because before that point, you wouldn't have even been at a point where this would have been being discussed, because it wouldn't have even been acceptable to have these discussions. For an interracial couple to even exist, for race mixing to even exist, would have been completely just societally outcast. So a lot of what the films are trying to do is kind of establish cultural context. So for 1967, of course, you're in the height of the civil rights movement. 2005, Obama's not president yet, but we're starting to kind of get more comfortable with these ideas. We're not there yet. And then in 2023 is arguably the most progressive out of the 3. It's of course the most like our modern world that we exist in today in 2025. We're able to relate to a lot more, and the culture is a lot more similar to what we have now. The story structure doesn't really change. It follows the same format. Some of the power structures change. So, for example, in the first movie, you have an African American man meeting the family of his white, I guess at this point, fiance, and then in the other 2 films, you have a white man meeting the parents of his black fiance. So the dynamic is switched in the latter 2 movies, but I think they each explore it in their own unique way. They make a lot of points that maybe the others didn't. My favorite of the 3, a lot of this is recency bias, but is You People, released in 2023, simply because, again, the culture is the most recognizable. A lot of the settings are recognizable, and the kind of power tension is still very much in existence, but it is kind of, it's a lot more recognizable. So we're starting in 1967 with Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was directed by Stanley Kramer. So in this movie, Joanna, a young white woman, brings home her black fiance, Dr. John Prentice, who is played by Sidney Poitier. Portier. Anyway. I don't think I noted who plays Dr. John Prentice. I don't know. But anyway, so in the context of 1967 and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, again, height of the civil rights movement. The Civil Rights Act had just been passed in 1964 by Lyndon B. Johnson, and then the following year, 1965, the Voting Rights Act would be passed, and then Loving versus Virginia, the Supreme Court case that made interracial marriage legal across the U.S., was decided the same year that the film was released in 1967. And at the time of the filming and the release of this film, interracial marriage was still illegal in a couple of states. Not a couple, I don't know how many. But it was illegal in certain parts of the United States, which is very interesting. And then the following year, in 1968, a year after the movie is released, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would be assassinated. So you're just at a kind of a really turbulent time in the United States as far as racial equality and these discussions being had about interracial relationships in marriage. So, a lot of tension really did exist around this time period. And it is noted in an article that I read in preparation for this video that the director Stanley Kramer specifically made the decision not to have romantic scenes between the two in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, for the reason that he didn't want to make white audiences uncomfortable. The discussion even happening around interracial relationships would have been controversial, but hopefully today it is kind of crazy to us that this is something that they were even thinking about. Because something as simple as there's only one scene where they kiss in the movie, and it's seen through the rear view mirror of the taxi that they are taking. So you're not even really seeing it directly. It's kind of from a forced perspective. It's kind of out of the way, like, hey, we're kind of putting this here, but we're also kind of not. So making the point without really making the point. So let me see. I'm just looking through my notes here. So, and then I'm reading a quote by an article by Claude J. Smith Jr., saying, even the photo on the VHS cardboard cover shows the white actress about 2 feet in front of Portier, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm just saying Portier, as if the physical distance in the image was needed to kind of give white audiences the illusion of safety and control. So even in this context where they're discussing interracial marriage at a time when it would have been extremely controversial, they're still doing the best that they can to make sure that they aren't offending white audiences by saying, hey, this is it's a black guy trying to marry a white woman. But they're still doing the most that they can to try to make sure they're not turning anyone off. And then, so we're going to pivot to 2005's Guess Who, directed by Kevin Rodney Sullivan. And the story is flipped this time. So you have a white man meeting the parents of his black girlfriend at the time. And I think the point that the film is making is he's trying to ask for the father's basically blessing to ask her to marry him. So the black woman is Teresa, played by Zoe Saldana, and her white boyfriend Simon, played by Ashton Kutcher. And then the main focus of the film is the kind of dynamic between Simon and her dad, Percy, who's played by Bernie Mac, which is an amazing casting decision. I didn't really recognize the other two who were playing the couple. I didn't know who they were, but Bernie Mac, I mean, everyone knows Bernie Mac. So 2005, America is obviously in a different place. Barack Obama had just been elected to the U.S. Senate in 2004. He was a rising star within U.S. politics. He hadn't been elected president yet. Of course, at the time in 2008 when he would be elected president, and in 2009 when he would be inaugurated. That in of itself was very controversial to people at the time. So in 2005, you're not really at this point where we've moved past it. Culturally, it's a lot more acceptable. I don't think it's quite as controversial as it would have. Well, it's just not as controversial as it would have been in 1967. But you're still not at a point where people are entirely used to this idea. It deals with the subject matter in a very different way. So 1967's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner there are some kind of comedic moments. It uses humor, but it's more kind of dry humor. It's more just, these are awkward situations. It's not reliant on it, and it's not prevalent. So in 1967, Stanley Kramer was just trying to get the point across to the audience, say, hey, this is a problem, this is how they dealt with it, maybe this is how we as a society can start to deal with it, and ultimately become more accepting of this idea. And in 2005, again, it's very different, but it still deals with the subject matter, but it doesn't take itself quite as seriously. It is a comedy film, it's a rom-com. And most of the dynamic is between Percy and Simon, of their kind of turbulent relationship. And in the film, we see her mom, Teresa's mom, who I can't remember her name right now, but she is very friendly towards Simon. You kind of see in the start of the movie, she's a little like, I don't know. She's a little skeptical, I guess. But pretty quickly, I mean, probably within the first 30 minutes of the film, she's fine with it. She's making the effort to kind of reach out to Simon. There's a scene in the restaurant where um, Simon, they're all having dinner, and Simon orders himself a drink. So I don't remember what it is, but he orders himself an alcoholic drink. The rest of the table has just basically gotten sodas, lemonade, water, that kind of thing. And then, so Freddie Mac's character kind of chastises him. He's like, "Oh man, the rest of us are gonna act like adults. We're gonna be responsible. You know, we don't do that business around here." And the mom kind of makes a point of, she says, "Actually, I think I'm gonna have, I don't remember what she orders, but she makes a point of ordering an alcoholic drink." And then she kind of, there's this shot of her face where she just kind of nods at him, like, "Hey, I see you. Not that big of a deal. Don't listen to him." Like, you know, you're welcome here, basically trying to make him more comfortable. But the ultimate point of the film is that Simon really has to kind of prove himself to Percy, whereas in the earlier film, um, the doctor, and I'm keeping looking back at these names because I can't remember everything, but Dr. Prentice is essentially having to prove himself to the white parents. Now it's kind of flipped. So hang on, I just went down too far. The power dynamic is still very much there. In 2005, you're closer to being 50 years away from 1967 than not. I mean, it's 40 something. Yeah, I can't really do that math, but it's it. I'm sorry, I'm stuttering. The family kind of still holds the right to approve the relationship. You're still asking for permission. It's still controversial. The point is still there. Of Teresa's sister at one point asking in the movie, "Your boyfriend's white? Like, you have a white boyfriend? Ooh, like, I'm never gonna have to worry about anything I do from this point forward because you're the one who brought a white boy home." Like, so the power dynamic is still very much in play, and still this kind of thing exists of, you have to ask for permission for this to be acceptable. This isn't something you can just do. This isn't something that is completely normalized yet. You still have to ask for permission. So we're going to skip ahead to 2023 now, about 2 decades later, to You People, directed by Kenya Barris, with Jonah Hill as Ezra and Lauren London as Amira. And then, so moving on to the rest of the casting, Amira's brother Omar is played by Travis Bennett, which, for those of you who had amazing music taste in the early 2000s, or late 2000s, early 2010s, is Young Taco from Odd Future. So if you were ever on Tumblr or YouTube during the late 2000s, early 2010s, and if not, just Google it, but that's, you know, just do with that information what you will. Again, interracial couple following a white man. This time he's Jewish. I think it's more focused on the fact that he's religiously Jewish. I don't really think they're trying to make the point that he's like racially / ethnically Jewish. I think they're just practicing religious Jewish. But then Amira is not only black, but she's also Muslim. And then her dad, Omar. No, not Omar. What's the dad's name? Oh dear. I'll find it in a minute. But the dad is very, very, very traditionalist Muslim. I think the insinuation is made at some point that he might have been or might be Nation of Islam. It doesn't directly ever state that, and that could just be speculation. But that's just kind of what I gleaned from it based on how they showed him dressing, how, you know, he's very traditional. He wears the kufa. I think I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not, they'll come at me. But, so, Ezra's mom, Shelley, played by Julia Louise Dreyfus, and I'm butchering these names, but it really adds that I am it, because I think out of all three, this film is doing the best of emphasizing that, hey, like, they're meeting each other's parents. For Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, it's mostly the doctor meeting her parents. For Guess Who, it's mostly Simon meeting her parents. But this film, I think, does a really great job of kind of balancing that. So we see, you know, they're going to each other's bachelor parties and bachelorette parties. So it's kind of seen a lot of mixing in the way that the other films did, but not really to the same extent. Now, Ezra's mom, Shelley, to the point I was trying to make, is just the queen of awkwardness. She is trying so hard in some of these scenes. she is overcompensating in some of these scenes to try to make Amira feel comfortable. She's trying really hard, and it leads to a lot of awkward moments that you're just like, why would you say that? I mean, there's a point, I think it's at the bachelorette party, at Amira's bachelorette party, and she is like, and of course, a lot of Amira's, not of course, a lot of Amira's friends are also black. And so she reaches for Ezra's mom, Shelly, reaches for one of their hairs and like, oh, your hair is so pretty, and she pulls off her wig. And the poor girl, she just breaks down in tears. And it's a funny scene. It's very uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to watch, but at the same, it is funny. So a lot of what the 2023 film is doing is kind of exploring it in the context of modern culture. And I say modern just because, the modern is the present, and the present is briefly the presidents in the past. So I think in 20 years, 50 years, we're going to look at this film too and be like, oh, interesting. If future versions of this movie are made, or if hopefully we reach a point where there's not a need for these movies to be made, it's kind of going to become a time capsule like the other two movies. So another interesting kind of point in the movie is that Ezra, the opening scene of the movie shows Ezra hosting a podcast, and it's a podcast that he hosts with a black woman who's presumed to be lesbian or maybe non-binary. It's never explicitly stated, but they're talking really about culture. So they're talking about music, specifically hip-hop. They're talking about shoes and that kind of thing. So I think it's kind of dangerous to assign certain things to certain cultures or groups, especially in the United States or really anywhere. But the point is made and this is going to bug me. I'm going to go ahead and look this up, but I can't remember for the life of me what Amira's dad's name is. Hang on. You people cast. Okay, so the dad is... Oh shoot, I can't find it. Akbar. So Amir's dad, Akbar, makes the point at one point. So you're talking about black culture in your podcast, and he's just kind of like, So, and I think of the three, 2005's Guess Who did this too, but 2023's You People did a great job of showing this isn't just kind of one way, this is both. Because on the one hand, you have the kind of white group that is presumed to be kind of in charge, and then you have the black family that is not necessarily in the same stance within this power dynamic, but you still kind of see it as a level of mistrust. But what are you doing here? And at one point, Akbar directly asks Ezra, so you just come here basically for our women and our food. It's very confrontational, it's purposefully so. In that sense, it's kind of like 2005's Guess Who, where Bertie Mac's character is very confrontational towards Simon. This changes throughout the film, kind of more towards the end, but it's interesting to watch. There's this mistrust kind of on both sides, and you have at different points both sides trying to overcompensate. I'm just scrolling through my notes right here. So ultimately, I think all three do a great job of kind of making the point they want to make. And I don't even know if it's really trying to make a point. It's just trying to call attention of, hey, this is something that exists within our society. There are different ways of dealing with it, but I think ultimately we can progress past it. 2005's Guess Who, if I had to choose, I really like all of these movies, but if I had to choose, I think Guess Who is kind of the weakest if you're looking at it from the standpoint of, this is a movie that's trying to make a point. It relies very much on comedy. It's a comedic movie, it's a rom-com. It's not taking itself too seriously, and it's not really, its primary goal is not making a point, it's to make audiences laugh. If I had to choose the strongest of the three movies, I'm going with You People 2023. Again, a lot of that has to do with recency bias, a lot of that has to do with the casting, and a lot of it has to do with just the culture is recognizable. It looks the most like today's modern world. So, In 1967, a black man essentially has to be flawless in order to impress the white parents. 2005, a white man essentially has to earn trust of the black family, of the black parents, and in 2023, both families are struggling with each other, dealing with these concepts of trauma, privilege, and control. And before I forget, I want to make this point that in 2023's You People, there is a very uncomfortable conversation had where both families are sitting down at dinner and a comment is made about how much black Americans have struggled in the United States. And so a conversation about slavery is brought up, to which Shelley, Ezra's mom, says, well, Jewish people had the Holocaust. So that in of itself is a very uncomfortable conversation. I think when you start to get into this kind of dynamic of you're discussing struggles, but you're trying to compare them, of well, my struggle's worse than yours, I've gone through more than you, your people are more or less oppressed than mine. That is a bad conversation on its best day. At the very least, you're getting into dangerous waters, you're getting into uncomfortable territory, and so if you're talking about these two things, and at a dinner table, where you're supposed to be becoming acquainted with one another's families, and you're saying, well, this is worse than that, that's just not a conversation you want to be having. It doesn't really matter the context, that's just not a conversation you want to be having. So, I think all of these films, I think a lot of these films do a good job of making the point that they're trying to make. What's up, man? No, you can come over, man. Yeah, I am, but dude, come on, it's. Oh, okay. No, it's good. I'm recording a assignment for my composition 2 class. Alright, take it easy, man. Someone I know from another class, and someone I know from another class. So again, I think when you start to get into these conversations of comparing struggles, of saying one person's is worse than another, having conversations about slavery in the United States and the Holocaust are bad enough as their own, but when you're fine. When you get into this conversation of kind of trying to compare them and saying, well, mine is worse than yours, it's just not a good conversation to be having. Ultimately, I think all 3 of these films, you can come over, it's fine. Okay. All 3 of these films do a really good job of making the point that they're trying to make. Again, 2005's Guess Who takes itself not really seriously. Its priority is as a comedy film. Its priority is not really trying to make the point. Out of the 3 films, I think Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967, directed by Stanley Kramer, is kind of the golden standard. Am I saying it's the first movie or form of media, book, play, whatever? And in fact, I think it's based on a play. But am I saying it's the first to ever deal with this dynamic of an interracial couple? No. But I think as far as popular culture goes, I've heard this film referenced so many times. And out of the 3 movies, it is kind of the first to do this, because Guess Who, even the name, is derivative of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and then You People is derivative of the other 2. I think primarily Guess Who 2005, but it's still borrowing elements from 1967's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. So, 2023's, I think, does a great job. You People does a great job of balancing comedy with the point that it's trying to make. It makes the point very well, but it's also funny at times. It is also kind of in the sense of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. It's reliant on kind of this dry humor, but it incorporates it really well. And in certain cases where you have these conversations that are happening of where Akbar is being very confrontational towards Ezra in real life, and where Shelley pulls off the lady Amira's friend's wig at the bachelorette party. A lot of these scenarios, if you were to see play out in real life, I would personally be appalled. And in a lot of these scenarios too, the conversations wouldn't go the way that they would. A lot of them would deteriorate a lot faster, and they would not be making the same effort to be friendly. Of course, for the sake of the movie, I think it incorporates them all really well. So, all of these films ultimately kind of serve as time capsules for the time period that they exist in. Again, 1967, you're at the height of the civil rights movement. The Civil Rights Act is going to be passed in 1964 by LBJ. 1965, the following year, is the Voting Rights Act. 2005, Obama has just been elected as the U.S. Senator, and won't be elected to as president for another 3 years, inaugurated in 4 years. And then in 2023, we're in a post-Obama world. It's the most progressive out of the three, and I think it makes the point the best out of the three, but they serve as time capsules of this is how things were then, this is how far we've come, but I think the ultimate question is how far do we have to go? Because in a perfect world, there is not really a need to make these films. In a perfect world, there's not controversy surrounding the idea of the very existence of an interracial couple. If you were, you have this kind of meet the parents dynamic of the future father-in-law is skeptical of his mostly daughters, boyfriend slash fiance. But I think the fact that these three movies are adding this thing which is the focus of controversy surrounding interracial relationships, I think is something that hopefully we can progress past. I think You People especially gives a lot of hope. They all kind of give hope. The parents of the white counterpart, whether it's in the first film being the white daughter and the other two being the white son, they're all portrayed as pretty liberal, as pretty progressive, as pretty understanding. But they still have their reservations. And I think 2023's You People kind of gives us the most positive outlook of what can we be doing within the next years and the next decades to get to a point where there's not a need for these films. I love all three of these movies. I love the points that they're trying to make, and I love the dynamic that we see between the couple and then their families. I think they're really successful at doing what they're trying to do. And yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if in the future we see future iterations of this film, or if